Good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be back at Republica. 7 years ago, I came here to talk about how freedom of thought requires media that don't listen to and watch and surveil us as we use them, and why media that consumes us in the end consumes freedom of thought. 3 years ago, Mishi Chaudhry and I came here to talk about the last kilometer of the net, the part that is closest to you, which had become the behavior collection system embracing humanity, and began the process of making surveillance and autocracy perfect. Now we are approaching the end of the most fateful decade for the human mind since the French Revolution, and everybody is beginning to notice something, and our theme this year for all of us is what is happening to the nature of the human mind. We built a new neuroanatomy for the human race, one which provides an exoskeletal nervous system for all the billions of us, begins the process of turning us, all of humanity, into a superorganism. A process that many of us, old enough to have been around at the beginning of all of this, welcomed, for the possibility of the liberation of the human mind that it presented. Every human brain learning everything that it wants to learn without being constrained by cost or power. A revolution which we sought to bring about with free software, with inexpensive hardware, with the bandwidth that could allow every brain on earth to learn. And we have been, for the last decade, coping with the horrid, unexpected, or at least unintended consequences of that revolution. So we built this network that embraces every human mind. Within another generation, every brain of every human being on Earth will be formed directly in connection with the net from birth onward. Every human mind will develop in the context of all the other human minds connected to the net, and all those non-human agents beginning to develop inside that nervous system we are building. But we turned our net dark on ourselves when it came time to articulate the physiology that anatomy makes possible. So we wired up everything so that every human brain could access everything, but we built media that consumed us as we consumed it. My friends in the Soviet Union, when there was a Soviet Union, knew, as they used to say, that the only free cheese is in a mousetrap. Which proves, of course, that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was not a bad place to learn the fundamentals of surveillance capitalism. That's what we did, right? We turned the network backwards on itself so that the services First, telecommunications, storage, time management, search, etc., etc. All the services became the cheese on the stage of the mousetrap, offered for free in return for information about each human being in real time and the opportunity to push. The neuron at the end of the network, the one closest to you most of the time, is a spy satellite. The densest collection of sensors, gram for gram, ever engineered by human beings. We've stuff in orbit that's pretty dense with sensors. The Americans used to brag during the Cold War that we had things in orbit that could take a picture of a golf ball on the surface of the Earth. But gram for gram, that thing you're taught to call a smartphone, it's smart and it's just a phone, so don't be afraid of it. Gram for gram, that smartphone is denser with sensing than the spy satellite in orbit, and it's all aimed at you. That's the neuron closest to you in the net most of the time. It's very cheap to take pictures of golf balls now. We don't need to put a thing in orbit to take a picture of a golf ball on the ground. Everybody has a little camera and they take a picture of their own golf ball. And they put it in the net, and we have it instantly. That network, equipped to sense the human being at its end more completely than anything else, carrying a battery that gram for gram stores more power than a nuclear power plant, because of course you need a lot of energy for all those sensors. That neuron creates a network whose purpose now is to acquire your behavior, as much of it as possible, and to offer you services that justify the degree of information you are giving up in return for the services you are receiving. Pretty amazing services, if you consider email and calendaring and stuff that any little box can do to be amazing services. What is really amazing is the price at which they are delivered to you, which isn't zero. It's the cost of who you are. The surrender not just of what you know about yourself, but all that can be inferred from your behavior, sensed all the time. And then the opportunity to push back at you. The computers that we use now push us very hard. Tens of thousands of times a day, they show an advertisement and measure a response. Thousands of times a day. In one study, more than 2,000 of young people in the United States, the phone gets physically interacted with more than 2,000 times a day. In the past history of the human race, if there were a thing in your pocket that you touched thousands of times a day, it would be assumed to be the result of obsessive compulsive disorder. Now it's normal. This is the network within which, in one generation, every human mind will be formed from birth. Physiologically, this is not good for human beings. Intellectually, this is not good for the human race. Economically, it makes a ton of money. Shoshana Zuboff, in her masterpiece last year, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, offered an account of the political economy that now drives this network. The structure of selling human attention by rapid, but I mean really rapid auctions conducted trillions of times a day to reach billions of people to make them behave. It's very important to recognize that once behavior collection is what the network really does, then what it attempts to maximize is behavior. This lies beneath the increasingly important intellectual discipline referred to as persuasive design. That is, the design of hardware and software to cause you, to persuade you, actually to addict you, to registering your behavior through the sensing system. Clicking, swiping, moving. Behavior is what the network now metabolizes. It eats yours, and it lives off that behavior that it acquires. It emits stimuli designed to cause more behavior. Persuasive design, we may say, is a bunch of geeks doing with math and science what Stephen P. Jobs did by art, right? Persuade you to hold it, to touch it, to interact with it, to sense your wishes and your needs in it, to deliver your anxieties to it. This is what we mean when we say it's so convenient. That's the physiology of the network now. It metabolizes behavior and it emits stimuli for new behavior. It is, in that sense, parasitic. It lives off us. It makes a good living. But it also carries the knowledge of all that human behavior acquired. It has a view of the nature of human existence, which is very special. Embracing both the most specific possible awareness of your life, how you feel, how you act, what you do, how fast you move, what you're looking at, what you're thinking about, at least so far as the search box and your swiping behavior can tell them. At the same time that the network contains a synoptic view of human behavior, billions of people, all behaving, all adding up their behavior to everybody else's behavior to offer a picture to the machine of the large-scale structure of human activity. From the very smallest, your momentary reflexes, your momentary movements of attention, to the very largest questions: how do humans behave? What are the patterns we can find there? How can we recognize? That is, after all, what we call machine learning now, recognition of patterns. How can we recognize the patterns of human behavior on the largest scale, from the smallest to the largest, from that which is precisely descriptive of you to that which is immanent to being human, all collected all the time, nothing ever lost or forgotten? In the whole long history of the human race, we've had really only one way of describing that view, from every sparrow falling to the destiny of the world. We called it, when we thought of it at all, we called it the mind of God. And so what have we now? What have we wrought? What is this network in which we are now wrapped everywhere all the time? The bad news is, it's the parasite with the mind of God. So who are we? What is our relationship to this network now? We behave for it. What the network needs, what it takes from us, what it drinks, its sustenance, is our behavior, and it makes more of it. The human attention system, the quality of our distinctively human minds, that ability to focus and to think about something, to hold it in a mental space of our own, is where the network chemically alters who we are. The ability to pay attention is a thing we learn, partially in utero, partially as a descent from those who came before us, but in every human organism, a learned, acquired skill. Those who work on understanding the psychology of human infants can point to the ways in which the attachment between the caretaking adult human and the infant generates the nature of attention. But the machine's view of our attention, well, it's a raw material, a resource for extraction. All those artifacts sensing you, stimulating you, producing behavior so they can acquire the behavior thus produced, conscript attention. We build the things so that they are good at conscripting your attention. They make attractive noises. They vibrate in fulfilling fashion. They interrupt the stream of internal life in order to deliver now this very important message about the job your friend just got, or the vacation your pal just took, or here's an advertisement, do you want to click on this? But after all, of course, the stream, it's the right word, it's continuing, undestructed, uninterrupted, natural as water falling down the side of the hill, stream of what comes to you, drowns the inner dialogue, removes interiority, changes your understanding of time. Too long, didn't read. How long is too long? As long, for example, as Tolstoy's Ratimir? In the 20th century, at the end of the 20th century, was the golden age of reading, it turns out. Access to almost everything, and the mental facility to hold all that reading. Too long, didn't read? War and Peace? Yeah, I can believe that. But when I was a college senior in a half-year modern comp lit course, we read Moby Dick and War and Peace and Anna Karenina and Ulysses and 100 Years of Solitude in 14 weeks. We did because we could. We did because we were trained, because we were lucky, because we were privileged people in a world which allowed us to develop our minds that way. But also, though we didn't know it, we couldn't have conceived it. Even though I was then developing programming languages at IBM and I thought I knew a bunch about technology, we couldn't have foreseen that the people who came after us would be crippled in acquiring that ability by the incessant disturbance of the machine seeking attention. What is happening to our attention span is a scientific object of study. Last month, in Nature Communications, 4 authors, led by Philip Lawrence Speke, document by multiple longitudinal studies of everything from movie ticket sales and book publications to Twitter handles and to Twitter hashtags and Google searches, the extent of the shortening of attention span over time, decades. The dynamic acceleration of the process of competition for attention, accompanied by a simple mathematical model of the nature of that dynamic shortening of attention. We can measure the extent to which we are fracturing the coherence of the human mind. And we can feel it when we watch our own interactions with the people and the network around us. I admit to being excessively old-fashioned. I run a lot of servers, 14 of them. I have a lot of endpoint stuff around me, ThinkPads, Chromebooks, without Chrome on them, and all sorts of similar things. And never, 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 never at all, ever do I see an advertisement on a computer. That's the way I run my stuff, right? Because I can't help it. Because I started using computers when I was 12 in 1971. And the gravitational consequence of having grown up computing without disturbance leaves me hypersensitive to efforts to control my thinking from yet another message, from yet another friend or friend or friend. So I'm speaking out of a condition of ignorance and helplessness with respect to how you all manage this. I don't know how you can. It's a triumph, an extraordinary victory, that you retain the ability to think despite all that disturbance. If your sleep were as disturbed as your waking life, it would be sleep deprivation torture and you would die. You wake somebody up several hundred times a night to tell them something, you're hurting them. Everybody knows that because the physiological relationship to sleep is so demanding. But something bad is happening to you when the lights are on, too. And you triumph over it because you were people who were born on the cusp of this. And your habits, though they may not be as hyper retrograde as mine, are still the habits of people whose minds were formed not in relation to the net. You still maintain a sense of the purpose of human thought, which assumes that your thinking is for some purpose other than the creation of measurable behavior. But pretty soon, you're going to be outnumbered. Because that's not what it feels like to be an infant connected to this net from the beginning of life. I have a street photography project in New York that I call the 21st Century Madonna. On the street, I photograph people carrying an infant in a front carrier. And the adult is looking here, and the infant is looking at the adult looking at the phone. That's the birth of a new cultural system in the human race, spreading faster than Christianity, or Islam, or any other fast-moving cultural innovation in the history of humankind, changing who we are by changing the purpose of our thinking. You may notice there are also some consequences for politics. That is to say, we are experiencing a decline in public rationality. We are experiencing it not merely in one society or another. We have not merely Trump or also Brexit. We are experiencing an attack upon our own ability to deliberate. It's hard. It is. When we increase the flow of information, when we maximize the accessibility of everything, the problem of ascertaining truth becomes harder. There's more to sort through. This is correct. But the most important change is not the volume of the material requiring analysis. It's the time in which analysis needs to occur, the space in which it happens. In the European world, we came to our interiority through the Reformation. We came to the nature of how we understood our inner lives through a change in the religious ideology of the societies of the north of the European peninsula, the ones where the word, where literacy driving religious contemplation privileged the individual over all other loci of power in society. Literacy drove internality, and internality drove democracy, the sense of the individual as the unit of decision-making. We are now terrified of algorithms, and we are justifiably spending a fair amount of time on the social consequences of this or that way of automating decision-making in organizations. We are, ironically, less concerned about the consequences of non-algorithmic thinking, impulsive thinking, merely responsive thinking in the individual human brain, increasingly given over to activity of swiping and clicking and watching random pieces of the passing show go by through the status updates and the Instagram commentary and all the other pieces of what we are pleased to call social media. And what is decaying is that private internal space in which truth is sorted out and the human being decides for herself what is the purpose of the world, what is the meaning of my existence here, how should I live. Not surprisingly, the machine is not interested in how you should live. It's interested only in how much you behave. Political dialogue becomes about striking poses, acting, much less about considering, let alone reconsidering. Taking something into an internal space of your own and thinking about it over time. You do win a daily victory. You still achieve that against the enormous pressure of the devices you keep around you and the way they work. But you cannot keep it up forever. Or rather, like me, you can insist upon holding a particular technological relationship to the machine. You can preserve some mental space of your own. But how do you allow the generation coming to behind yours to inherit that? So here is our problem. The attention span of the human race collectively is shortening. The precious autonomy of internal mind that we gained barely half a thousand years ago, and which we used to make democracy and the right of the individual and the sense of self-development, intellectual and social, which we call freedom, is threatened by our own habits as they take hold in this net we do not want, with these media that consume us as we consume them. Like the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, this is a colorless, odorless, tasteless change. And understanding the second-order consequences of this pollution we are polluting our inner self with is tricky, complicated business. It requires systematic thinking, not overreaction, not panic, not a sense of revulsion or disgust, not an anti-modernist reaction, not break all the machines, destroy the network. We built this to liberate humankind. We can't just take it apart and destroy it because we have allowed it to twist in our hands and bite us back. We have to fix it. We have a fairly short period of time. We wasted, I don't mean the people in this room, we are the people who have been worried about this all the way along, but we collectively have wasted crucial time. And the clock now runs against us as it runs against us on the planet. Two great environmental disasters, each requiring our fullest concentration and our broadest social mobilization. We're busy. We're following one another's feeds. We're having trouble concentrating on the main events. We're not so easily able to keep our eyes on the prize. Too long. Didn't read. I mean, John Locke's essay on human understanding, for example, much too long, didn't read. Das Kapital? Way too long. Even in the 20th century, it was long. But we need them. We need all that accumulated rumination we called civilization once upon a time, when we weren't displacing it with, well, the chemistry of the machine-man relationship. So, we better do something about this. Our time is growing very short. In fact, I wouldn't really come and 7 years in bother you again about this if I didn't think it could be fixed. But remember that those of us whose minds were formed outside the context of the net have got to do it. It's much, much harder to get out than it is never to have gotten in the first place. My poor students in law school who want privacy, but everything they've got around them is built against it. It's easy for me simply to refuse. I don't have a Google account, sorry. But what do you do when your life was given away at the beginning? Your parents put you on the services. You've lived your entire lives with them. You wouldn't know how to have a calendar on the side of a refrigerator anymore. So those of us in that liminal period, as the nature of human thought was changing, as the purpose of ideas went from being constructed inward to signaling outward, those of us who live here now, we have to deal with this. We can't leave this for the future. Not yet are the young blocking the bridges on us to force us to deal with this. Not yet. Which means we better do it now before it gets that bad. What must we do? We need to change the political economy of services. The people in this room are the producers of the political economy of services, not the beneficiaries. I don't mean that you're all the shareholders of it, but you know how it's made. You ran the pipes, as I did too once upon a time. We need to make it possible to federate all services in the net. Why is such a technical goal so terribly important? Because when services are federated, they are no longer paid for by exclusive access to the internal lives of human beings, and they are no longer justified by the profitability of advertising sales. When we are taking in one another's washing, when our messaging and our calendaring and our storage and all those other piddling commodity services that we use, when we are delivering them to one another cooperatively, we are turning the net back in the direction that we originally wanted, the one in which it acts to liberate us through individual effort to teach and learn. The federation of all services is not an inconceivable idea. Most of the services we have were meant to be federated. The net was designed for it. We are undoing problems rather than making terribly complicated inventions. This is the intended goal of the little gesture I call Freedom Box, the manufacture of simple, inexpensive, self-administrating servers that we can hold in the palm of our hand and distribute throughout the world like apple seeds. A great intercontinental activity. The software for Freedom Box is made everywhere from Hyderabad to Seattle, and the current versions of the boxes are manufactured in Bulgaria. Because, of course, we do have the value of the net to make our free software to spread our inexpensive hardware over the world, to do all the things we need in order to make this neuroanatomy pay off, not by centralization, but by diffusion. Which brings with it naturally the goal of intellectual self-development at those human endpoints that we were seeking in the first place. We need to understand that the businesses we have called telecommunications and social media are behavior collection businesses. We need to regulate them not as telecoms or platforms, but as behavior collectors. We need to understand the business of behavior collection, like the business of coal mining or steel production, as a business, subject to regulation in the public interest on the basis of what it is, not what it claims to be, not what it hopes to be, not what it says on the shareholders' pamphlets that it is, but what it does to society, which is what regulation is about, what happens to society. GDPR is the beginning of an effort to think about the regulation of behavior collection. But it still depends upon the idea of consent by individuals to the collection of behavior as the relevant category for the legal administration of this business. Consent is not the heart of behavior collection. It's an environmental subject. Everybody's actions affect everybody else's actions. Therefore, individual consent should not be the test. What are the rights? What are the standards? What are the social objectives within which behavior collection can be not just allowed but accepted? We need to appreciate that the goal of the network is not the constant subsidiary mental activity of human beings. The goal of the network is not push, it's pull. That is to say, all of the effort to make the network operate on internet time is a form of pollution. What we really wanted was for human beings to initiate requests for what they want, what they need, what they wish for, what they think, and what they learn. This was the subject of our effort in making the net and the free software that now runs it in the first place. To give users rights, but also to encourage prosumption, to encourage those who use to scratch an itch, to learn how to make, to become better makers, ultimately to serve others' needs as well as their own by cooperating in learning and making knowledge. We need to understand that as a concrete, explicit social goal. The jangling in the net, like the noise in the street, may be a collateral consequence of what we do. We had a transportation revolution too, in fact, in the last 200 years. They're very noisy. The world was quieter when it had only horses in it, but we live with the noise for a good reason. It is not clear what the objective of social regulation of the net ought to be unless it is the improvement of human intellectual life. The broadening, to be sure, the maximizing of access. But quality is important too. We are not just seeking to increase the quantity of human thought, although that is where the great big social benefits are in the extirpation of ignorance. But we are also still trying to improve how we think as well as how much. And it should be the clear goal of social policy to help us make the net quieter. Our politics depends upon it, I need not say. The health of our democracies depends upon it. The nature of our educational process depends upon it. The freedom of our grandchildren depends upon it. Too long, didn't read, is The Crisis of the Human Mind in 5 characters. It's good. We got a clear understanding of the problem. But we need to summon just enough longevity of thought to go about the business of fixing it, which means technology, politics, and law driven for the purpose of reanimating human concentration, reducing our attention deficit disorder induced by the nature of our market for services and the character of the machine we've built. We have to do that. The rising sea level is becoming evident to people, to the point at which denial has become, well, an exercise in deception. What is happening to the human mind is not quite so unambiguously clear just now. Most of the human race is most aware of an increase in access and convenience. Most of the human race has always lived in a condition of ignorance and cultural deprivation because that's what we do to the poor. And as Aristotle noted, the poor are always many and the rich are always few. But though we have a clear understanding of how things work, we, us, in this room, we are not yet capable of explaining to most of humanity why the benefits they are receiving are coming at a very high and ultimately unsustainable cost. For those who are hungry, who yearn for knowledge, who yearn for the ability of self-expression, who yearn to reach out and connect to other human beings and teach and learn from them, which is the human way, for those people who are deprived, free cheese is a good thing. And it's not their fault that we built the mousetrap and we didn't tell them. So we have an ethical obligation, a moral requirement. We have to deal with this. We can. We should. Human nature depends upon us to get it right. Time is running out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eben Moglen. So I'm just standing here in the middle of the stage, so we have time for Q&A, and I will stand here so we can queue up for Q&As, and I will hold the microphone for you. So, yeah, do we have time for Q&A?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So maybe you can introduce yourself and ask your question.
Sure. Hi, Eben, it's Corey.
Hi, Corey.
Quick question. Is it possible that the reason that we get so much data harvested from us and so many ads shown to us is because mostly it doesn't work very well? Like, the only emotion they manage to evince from us is anxiety and constant checking. Like, no one's ever figured out how to use Facebook to make you lose weight or, you know, be happy or whatever. Maybe they've got like a mind control ray that can only do one thing, which is make you anxious, which is just the same as, like, you know, a kid with a kazoo.
Well, anxiety, Corey, is surely the overall average of the emotional output. Though I think it would be fair to say that social media is a little better designed than that. I tell my students that each of these objects has a keynote emotion. That of Facebook is envy. That of Twitter is humiliation. There are a series of emotional outcomes, but the important thing about them is they're made to make you click and swipe. That is to say, whatever that emotion is, that the goal of the architecture, physical and software and all the rest, is to replow that into the network. I've been trying to understand for 2 years what the word convenience means. Because there are so many things that so many people around me find convenient that I wouldn't be caught dead doing, right? And so I keep trying to figure out, what is this convenience of which you speak? I have come to the conclusion, and here I feel as though I am walking in baby steps, in the footsteps of the giant, Mr. Jobs, the king of the undead now dead, who saw at first, I believe, what we mean by convenience is the surrender of an anxiety to the network. We hand an app something, and it's taken. So I think you were underestimating its quality. It creates anxiety, and then conveniently it eats it back into the network for you. It creates envy, and it makes you brag. It creates humiliation, and it makes you humiliate. It's a little better than you say it is, but you're right, of course, that its ultimate intellectual or life-affirming output to the human being isn't very good. That's not a defect, that's design. The purpose of this is not to benefit the human being. That's why the Matrix was the legend for all of this beforehand. The turning a human being into a source of electricity is what this is, man, right? So it works pretty good. It's cheap batteries, it powers a lot of stuff, and the quality degradation in human thought is a byproduct from the machine's point of view. So don't underestimate the opposition, man. We've been fighting them all their lives. They're still pretty good at what they do. I understand the inefficiency in the sense of I too have trouble losing weight. I too could use a network that helped me live better, think better, learn better, do better in my life. This is the network we meant to have. It's not the one we've got. If I had your talent for imaginative fiction, this is where my imagination would be going.
One more question.
So that was masterful and profound diagnosis. I would like some more prescription, doctor.
But if it's a misdiagnosis, then the prescription wouldn't be any good either. So, okay, well, so if it is true that we understand the nature of the physiology and we are beginning to grasp its pathology, the problem with prescription in the current world, I have a patented molecule here, would you like this? You'll live longer, is precisely the problem we're experiencing in coming up with solutions. We don't want radical surgery, we don't wish to die, but this can't be patched with somebody's patented molecule. We need, as always, three things: politics, technology, and law. I tried, admittedly too fast, it's just no time, to say at least a little bit about each of those three things. In technology, we need to re-architect for federation. In politics, we need to understand both the objective of government, that is the restoration of the quality of thought and the nature of past human relations, and we need to understand the subject of regulation, which is the behavior collection business. What do we need in law? We need regulation of the behavior protection business, and we need to remove the legal immunity of the intermediaries. We need to restore the principles of responsibility for what they do to the people it injures. We lifted the liability of the intermediaries in the 1990s to protect an infant industry against being collapsed by liability. That was successful. But temporary immunity is becoming permanent above-the-lawness, or else, even worse, deputation as the censors of everybody. This won't work. We need to restore ordinary principles of liability and responsibility to one another, and we need to use the legal system to help us, therefore, reduce this wart that we have developed, this forted-up object which is conscripting our biological existence. That's the best prescription I can offer on the usual small piece of paper in the bad doctor's handwriting, barely long enough and barely legible enough, but it's the best I can do for you. Sorry.
Thank you for the most striking panel I've heard so far at this Republica. Thank you a lot. When you were talking about the two crises, the climate and the control, I was wondering, how do Fridays for Future fit in your diagnosis? Because all those on the streets, they are digital natives. They have been growing up with the machines.
I am very struck, mostly because I spent a quarter century of my life in close relationship with my dear friend and comrade Richard Stallman. I am very struck by the similarity between Greta Thunberg and Richard Stallman. I call your attention to a kind of human being absolutely crucial to the well-being of the species. I think that the important point about this intersection and the way that certain highly focused, absolutely stubborn, completely imperviously ethical people are behaving in the human race right now is an indication of why we still have a chance. All right? I think that's what the meaning of the very ineffective free software movement and the highly effective Extinction Rebellion, or the other way around, depending how history turns out. I think the similarity between them is that one. The absolutely irreducible unwillingness of certain human beings to live with injustice or to ignore reality. And you're right that it may be more easy to get people to strike from school over the climate than to do something about the smartphone, particularly as various forms of social mobilization seem to require the smartphone. But we'll get that right. My friends in the Soviet Union were correct in their diagnosis, okay? The prescription, that was hard. We are lucky that we made it. In many human futures, we would not have made it. We got there by sheer will. But we can do this too, and in precisely that way. And what young people are experiencing about climate, they are beginning to experience about privacy too. I'll prove this to you. Last week, I watched Mr. Zuckerberg give an entire philosophic account of himself on a backdrop that said, "The future is private." That was stunning. I admit that it's hard for Mr. Zuckerberg to stun me. I was the one who said in a public speech in 2010 that he had done more harm to the human race than everybody else his age. And if I had said in 2010 when I said that, and by 2019 you're all going to agree with me, people really would have thought I was crazy. But we have reached a tipping point with social media, when even the people running the machine must describe it as pro-privacy or people won't use it. That's the beginning, right, of how we get to that unification of young people's awareness of the physical environment and its pathologies, and the intellectual environment and its pathologies.
With our schedule in mind, we might have time for 2 more questions.
I'll
or
be
one more
quick, I
question.
promise.
Okay, I'll pick this up from the Zuckerberg statement. I read his comment as the future is private, as we are not sharing our data set. And that's also you're talking about. We have the largest collection of data on behavior and of people, which in itself just holds no value. The question is, what kind of behaviors do we want to analyze it for? And the data has in itself also the answers to the question, what can we do to make it less attractive for people to stay there? So shouldn't we be concerned with access to those vast quantities of data that already exist, that are being mined for profit and not for people's interests?
Yes, we should be concerned about that. And if we could figure out a way to hack the system of law regarding data about people as effectively as we hack copyright in software, we would have the relevant tool. But we still haven't got there. And so the result is that we are accumulating the equivalent of radioactive waste, and we don't know what to do with it. I wish to stop digging the hole, but it doesn't mean I'm not also very worried about what we have already extracted from it.
One more.
Thank you. I would like to introduce a different, I'm not so good in English. We are using for artificial intelligence the two AI, and in Germany it is KI. And I would like to introduce the idea of expanded art, so that it's not artificial intelligence, but the intelligence of artists. And the idea of an artist is to take responsibility for his whole work. And we should get together in the idea that we are all artists in the world, and we have the responsibility for the future, and directly everyone itself. And we should find a way how we can get together without passing over our responsibility to very few people.
Is this a question or a statement?
Question, what?
It's a statement. It needs nothing but homage. I agree with you entirely. Here is the problem. One of the greatest artists of my generation was Stephen P. Jobs. And therefore, I must point out to you that art is not as morally, obviously right thinking as we would like to believe. Art is entirely consistent with moral monstrosity. One last question, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wonder if we do trust machines more than ourselves, talking about the internal space you were referring to.
The source of tragedy is that we trust the machine more than we trust one another. This is the beginning of why we go wrong. Because in preference to the difficulty of sorting it out among ourselves, we believe that more data and more analysis in more chips running faster will solve the problems. We do not understand who we are. We are the animal that has become what we are through our ability to teach one another. Over 5 million years, this has made the human race. When we give up teaching one another, because we trust the machine more, we begin the decay of what it means to be human, and we interrupt our evolution to bring you this fine commercial message. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Eben Moglen. Your applause.
We made